Yes, indeed. Welcome, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm coming to you live from a very, very foggy Breeden Hill. We're about 1,000 foot above sea level here, and at the moment it feels kind of like we're sort of half submerged in the sea. But that's farming life, and here we are. So I'm Jake. I'm the farm manager at Overbury. I came here to start my managing role in 2003. We joined Leaf in 2004, and Leaf are really key to how we run and manage Overbury Farms, and then that's morphed into Overbury Enterprises. And the Leaf integrated farm management wheel, which is here, plays a key role in all the aspects of managing the business. So Overbury Enterprises, it's an arable and sheep farm with a bit of land let for vegetables. It's been in the same family since 1722. So we're sort of approaching a sort of a 300th year anniversary in the next couple of years. And it's a really mixed farm, which makes it challenging for a manager, but it also makes it really interesting. So where I am on the top of the hill here, we're 1,000 foot above sea level. Cotswold brash soil, very, very thin, over limestone, quite high pHs, which lock up lots of nutrients, and water management is something that we need to be really, really hot on. So that's trying to reduce erosion from the slopes that we have, but also, Quinny, it's all right, we've got some dogs coming along. Go and get up. Good girl. And also storage. Water storage is crucial to how we're managing the farm on these real thin soils. So as you come down off Breeden Hill, we go into an area of sand and gravel, which has been dug for sand and gravel from the 1940s to the mid 1990s. Quinn, enough. And then we go down on some heavy Evesham series lias clay, and we've got different rotations on the different soil types. The veg land is let. We let about 100 hectares a year, some of which has got irrigation. And we're growing dwarf French beans, beetroot, and then some hand-picked peas as well, right up on the top of the hill here, which don't have irrigation. So integrated into the arable side of the business, we've got a sheep flock of about 1,000 ewes, which are lambing outdoors in April. Morning. And they are a mixture of... Quinn, stop it. So we also have 45 kilometres of footpaths and bridleways on the farm. And we get quite a lot of traffic from people. Lots of them don't have their dogs on leads. And part of the Leaf ethos that we have is about how we can communicate our farming story to the general public, who are ultimately our customers. So we have quite a lot of leaf boards out. There's 24, 25 leaf boards out on the farm, which are information boards. They're really good value. They last, in excess of 10 years. If you're a Leaf member, then they're really, really cheap. And it's a great way of being able to communicate whether we're spraying, habitat management, all of the things that nature and conservation, which is what we'll talk about shortly, are crucial to managing our farmland. So I'll use there a mixture of North Country mules and some Romney Cross Aberfields. We've got a very small Dorset flock as well, which are lambing at the moment. So there's 26 Dorset ewes, which are a bit of a sort of a hobby branch, if you like, to complement some of our direct selling of lamb. We're trying to get sort of grass and forage fed lamb available for Easter, really. But that's a bit of a hobby job. The farm also has an extensive higher level stewardship scheme running, which expires actually in December this year. And in terms of managing for landscape and conservation, we are really keen on stewardship schemes, and we have got pretty much all of the boxes ticked in terms of variation of habitat. And I think there's a few things to really bear in mind in terms of habitat. We're really lucky. We have got diverse habitats. We've got rough grassland, we've got wetlands, we've got hedgerows, we've got stone walls, all of which create this sort of diversity and this very traditional sort of patchwork landscape. And that is key to how we look after and manage our wildlife. So from our stewardship schemes, we've got pollen and nectar, we've got wild bird food plots, skylark plots, unharvested headlands. We've got cultivated margins for rare arable flowers, of which you can just make out a bit of a margin here. And that's been really interesting in terms of some of the species that we are finding here now. So we have got sort of long-eared poppies, which are really rare. Cornflowers are now coming back onto these margins. There is, they do take quite a lot of management, but the benefit is huge. We've had corn buntings up on here. We've had yellowhammers nesting on these margins, and considering we're right next to a footpath here, is a really key and sort of a pleasing fact, I suppose. And monitoring is also really important. How do we measure our sort of progress and our improvement? And that is through being able to monitor and count. So we started counting farmland bird species in 2004 with specific routes around the farm, different transects that we walk every year in April, May and June. And there we're we are recording all the different species that we find. And that's really important to be able to kind of gather data, if you like, so that we can justify improvements and sort of change of management and things like that. So this last year, actually, in terms of monitoring and measuring, we have also started with the West Midlands bird ringing group. So they've been coming up here at night with thermal imagery cameras and catching and ringing skylark. So last night they were out, caught some woodcock and rung them. So that's been fascinating. And this one field that we're in at the moment, this is a field called Big Joe's. It's wheat stubbles with an oat and legume cover crop in it. It's not very big in terms of growth. Really dry in August when it was planted, but it'll keep ticking over through the winter, and that's really important. But out here last night they captured or caught some skylark. I was out with them a few weeks ago, back during harvest, and we caught 14 out here skylarks, of which 12 were juveniles, and that's really important to be able to record those, because that's showing that we've got great breeding success in terms of habitat. So insect food for chicks, habitat for nesting, and they're out sort of on a fortnightly basis to have a look at what our species are. Last night they caught some golden plover, some woodcock, a stone chat. Yeah, some really interesting stuff. So in terms of how we manage the landscape, that sort of diversity of habitat, but then being able to provide food, nesting habitat and chick feed is really important. And then also being able to monitor and measure exactly what we've got. But for me, one of the huge parts of the farm which we haven't done enough monitoring and measuring about is the soil. And as a habitat, that is absolutely crucial to everything that we do, whether that's growing food for ourselves or providing food for nature. So in terms of our soil, we know very little about what goes on under the ground, and just show you how sort of stony and thin this soil is. It's really important to start to get a handle on how our soil is sort of functioning, and part of that is growing cover crops on here. These are all lovely cover crop roots right the way down here, pushing their way down through the soil and the stone. This sort of crumbly soil structure has really been improving since we've been using our no-till techniques. We've got some little worms in there as well, which we started in 2015, with the aim to provide continuous cover to protect the soil, so to reduce runoff, to capture nutrients, to feed all the biology in the soil. And, you know, that's a habitat all in its own world, and we just don't know enough about it. And everything we do has an impact on our soil. I mean, that's just great. The way the soil is bound up to all of those roots is making some huge improvements in the productive capacity of this soil, but also its sort of benefit for the wider environment. That's that's really great. So we try to look at rotation along the farm to keep that mixed up for, you know, if you look at the integrated farm management in terms of pests, weeds, diseases, rotation is absolutely crucial. Now you'll have to use your bit of imagination here a little bit, because we've got quite a tall old hedge here, sort of a row of trees really, sort of from that H pole going down, and then a nice big grassy bank either side of it. We've got great owl populations here, lots of barn owls, and these sorts of tussocky grass areas are absolutely crucial for providing vole habitat and mice, and other small rodents, which ultimately end up being breakfast, lunch and dinner for the owls. We've got a strip here of pollen and nectar mix, not looking great at this time of year, but you can hardly see it anyway, so that's fine. And then these sort of corridors of wildlife areas just enable our birds and our mammals to be able to move around in a sort of a landscape scale, which is crucial really, partly for the genetic pool. So one of the other things that we're really keen on is working with our neighbours, because it's all very well just being a sort of an island of sort of conservation and farming here, but if something catastrophic happens to some of our populations, we need to have that sort of genetic diversity to try and withstand that, but then also to sort of repopulate if, you know, the worst thing happens. Slightly better cover crop up here, it's still pretty small, but that will be okay. So yeah, corridors and networks. So again, working with partners, we're on a sort of a Back from the Brink project, looking at veteran trees, and how we can plant more trees within the landscape, and trying to sort of veteranize them earlier in their life, to try and speed that deterioration up, which seems really odd, but veteran trees are kind of 600 years old, and we can't really wait 600 years to fill that gap in. So many trees have been lost, so we're planting more and then sort of veterinizing them when they'll get to sort of 40, 50 years old. That probably won't be my job, to be fair, but we'll have plans in place to be able to do that. Quinn, come here. Here. Go. Come on. Hang on a sec. Whee! There we go. So one of the other great landscapes we've got, and you can't really see it, I don't want to go too far because last time we did it was we lost a bit of signal, is an Iron Age hill fort. We've got 5 scheduled ancient monuments on the farm, and each of them have got their own sort of management prescriptions, but in terms of looking after those habitats, this is really rough grazing up here. No fertilizer, no sprays, grazed by the sheep once or twice a year, usually after the wildflowers have sown. There's hundreds of different species of wildflowers and grasses up here. So we try to let those seed. We can't do it every year, but at least 2 years in 5, we'll try and let this all seed. We've actually made some hay from here before, and used that to green hay some other sites up on the hill to try and spread the seeds around. And very, very low stocking density of sheep when we are actually grazing these up here. So it's sort of getting on for 5,000 years old. Yeah, there was a time team dig in here back in the 1930s, not with Tony Robinson, but a different lot that did quite a lot of research. And yeah, it's great habitat to be able to sort of help manage. In terms of boundaries and stone walls, hedges, again, you know, slightly overlooked, but it's surprising how much extra habitat these walls can try and provide for. I mean, we've had birds nesting in here, but sort of lichens and you know, little snails and things like that poked away in there. Could have been a little nesting site in there. These are invaluable, really. Partly it helps with the stock in terms of windbreaks. We are quite exposed up here, but actually from a nature point of view, lots of different sorts of mosses that will be growing up here, different sort of lichens on there. You know, it's all really valuable stuff. So trying to maintain an upkeep of these, we've got 23 kilometers of stone wall, is quite a big undertaking, big task. But it helps us with our livestock management, partly for windbreak, but also, you know, if they were to fall down, then we'd need to replace them with something else. You could argue it'd be cheaper to just do it with a fence, but actually, we need to keep this sort of habitat all up together. The sheep are grazed using more of a rotational paddock grazing system now, which is quite difficult to manage on some of the fields. We've got 40 hectares of even little flowers appearing at this time of year, which is great to see. So on a nice sunny day, we'll have insects and things like that all over the place. And that's one of the interesting things about cover cropping, actually, is the fact that we're getting pollen and nectar sources available for insects at this time of year and on into November, which we never used to do before. And I'm sure that's all having a benefit in terms of insect populations, which then become food for birds, which is good. And I was talking about something else then, wasn't I? We were talking about sheep habitat. Oh yes, parkland. So we've got 40 hectares of grade 2 listed parkland in 4 fields, and actually to try and split those up so that we could use a paddock grazing system on those fields would be really detrimental to how that landscape looks. So in order to try and get the benefit of that, we are just multiplying up the number of stock that we have in those groups that run those fields. So we're stocking that at sort of 300 ewes per hectare, sorry, not per hectare, per field with lambs at foot. And then we're grazing that for a short period of time and then sort of moving them on. So it's not complete mob grazing, but it's within the natural boundaries of what we can and can't really do. Then that gives us an option to be able to at least have some of those benefits, if not all of them. Farming is a bit of a compromise all the way around, really. So yeah, there's not much of a landscape to be able to see up here. But if we're talking sort of main culture, oh look, hang on a minute, look at that bad boy. Very impressive. It's an adult one as well, which is good. So in terms of conservation, one of the things, I'm just going to go back to soil just for a quick session, because although I'm supposed to be talking about landscape and nature conservation, as I said earlier on, our soil management actually underpins a lot of the nature work that we're doing. So what we're trying to do is farm with more regenerative agriculture practices. And that is along 3 main sort of strands. One is do as little to the soil as you possibly can, keep the soil covered at all times, and keep a diverse and wide rotation. And those have huge benefits for nature. As we've been going along this journey, we have reduced our fungicides, we've reduced our fertilizer, our artificial fertilizer that we've bought, and applied, primarily nitrogen, now phosphorus, soon potash. We've stopped using insecticides. And again, I think that as a single reduction in agrochemicals has made a huge difference in terms of our bird and our wildlife population here. We are now also looking at reducing fungicides. So we haven't been using seed dressings for the last 3 years, since 2017. As in a fungicidal seed dressings, we still use manganese and zinc as a dressing. And we're actually now starting to look at some biological alternatives to seed dressings to try and prime our soil and our seed to have the best start that it possibly can. So, what we do in terms of management on the farm has a direct impact in terms of the nature that a holding like this is able to carry, and then hopefully to multiply up as well. So yeah, bit of a sort of a lightning tour, really. I'm just sorry that you can't sort of see too much.
No, this has been great.
From round and about.
While you're talking about soil, we've just done a session this morning where everyone yesterday went out and did a soil test, and most earthworm counts. And we've got a question about what is your soil testing regime? What monitors are you using for soil health, and are you precision farming?
So let's go in reverse order. Are we precision farming? Yes, we are. We are using variable seed rates. And for me, that's probably the best value in terms of paying for precision, because what we're trying to do there is achieve a much more consistent and even plant population right from the start. So the variation of applied nitrogen after that is less of an issue. We have stopped actually applying variable rate P and K for the last 4 or 5 years, actually. We have been using a bit of phosphorus down the drill at the time of planting. But one of the things that's been fascinating is looking at how much phosphorus we've got already in our soils. And these soils up here, they've probably got between 5 and 6 tons of phosphorus per hectare in them. It's just that it is in the non-available pool. And what we need to do is improve our biological activity within the soil to move that from an unavailable form into a plant available form, and only biology is able to do that. So we have been focusing more on improved soil biology to be able to access the minerals that are already in our soil. As I just said just now, we're using zinc and manganese as seed dressings. We use quite a lot of trace elements to try and correct balances. Organic manures are on the farm in rotation. So biosolids, poultry litter, mixed with the stud straw. We haven't really talked about the stud, but there's a stud farm on the farm, on the estate as well. And we do a straw for muck deal with a neighbour. So lots of those organic amendments are coming through, and we're rotationally using those. In terms of soil testing, so we used to do SOYL, variable rates. 2006 we did the first year, so we did 6, 10 and 14. And it gives you an idea, but it's just a chemical number. Again, going back to what's available and what's not available, it still doesn't really mean much. So we've been doing a lot more soil testing recently, looking at availability of nutrients. So we're working with a company called SSM, Sustainable Soil Management. And there we're sampling, looking at macro and micronutrients, the ratio of all of those within the soil, but actually their availability in the soil. And that's the bit that I'm really interested in now. It's a bit like going to a supermarket and you're there at 10 o'clock at night and they close at 9. It's all in there, but you just can't get it. So this is where we're driving the system, and biology and growing plants like these cover crops will help to mineralize and make those nutrients available. So we're doing a bit of precision farming, but mainly through variable seed rating. We are using some satellite imagery for looking at green area indexes and green area indexes and sort of biomass maps, that sort of stuff. But still, the jury is still out a little bit in terms of the financial return from that. I get the bit about putting more fertilizer on.
I think we've just lost you a second, Jake. Usually,
more backward as rates back, and we're down 20% now on where we were 3 or 4 years ago. But we're just using it just a little bit smarter, really.
Great. I think we caught the last end of that. Are you measuring plant nitrogen during growth?
We're doing a lot of tissue sampling through the growing season, yes, and then we're correcting as a sort of result of those tissue analysis. We're just going to start playing this year with sap analysis as opposed to just sort of tissues, and I think that's going to give us a more accurate measure of the sort of the condition of those plants as the season is progressing. So tissue analysis, sap analysis. We've been doing some infiltration. So going back to the soil just for a brief second, we're doing water infiltration tests, and we're doing a bit of vest scoring, worm counting, to try and have a look at getting some markers in the ground. Organic matter testing, we're doing that. And we're doing that with loss on ignition and also a potassium permanganate test, which I think will become more and more kind of recognised. Loss on ignition is quite unpredictable, especially with this sort of high calcium soil. So it's giving us some quite high readings, which we're not entirely convinced about on this soil type. It's better on some of the heavier ground. So we're doing soil mineral N core testing as well on different soil types in different parts of the rotation, and then we're using that to plan our nitrogen in conjunction with some of the satellite imagery as well.
Great
so
use
of all sorts.
Tech there as well. You've touched on earlier about, I think it's been really evident of how the different elements of integrated farm management interact, and that you can't talk about landscape and nature without talking about soil. The other aspect I wondered you could tell us a bit more how you think about its interaction with crop health and protection, just in terms of maybe beneficial species and especially those corridors for habitats. What's your perspective on that interaction?
Absolutely crucial. It's the sort of the biological world which we really don't know very much about. What we do know is, since we stopped using heavy cultivation equipment, we're starting to find insects on the farm that we just never saw before. Things like rove beetles. We're finding more and more carabid beetles, which are all predators of slugs and slug eggs. And they just appeared. So Mother Nature is brilliant at recolonizing after a disaster. But B, the fact that a change in practice can actually relatively quickly start to put right maybe some of the damage that's been done historically. So that's really really positive. In terms of how it all fits together with plant health and crop health, we're trying to work towards a system with less artificial impact or artificial inputs and less impact on the environment. So we did some trials last year on some biological fungicides, which is basically a load of bacteria to eat septoria. And we did that in conjunction with another trial where we are DNA testing plants for septoria to try and find out when they get infected before any sort of visual signs are there. And we did 2 4-hectare trials, split fields. Actually, this was one Big Joe's and another field. No difference in yield, halved the cost. and we sent the grain away for sort of fusarium analysis, less fusarium in the biological treated areas of the field. Protein levels were similar, hectoliter weight, bushel weight, that was all similar. So it was a dry year. Septoria wasn't really a pressure for us last year, but we're going to keep and roll that trial out a bit more. So in terms of plant health, if you've got a healthier soil, your plants will inherently be healthier, and if they're healthier, then they will be able to resist pest and resist disease attacks much easier. And I think that's kind of the sort of system that we're working towards. So we're using a lot of trace elements to just to try and get our plants to be as healthy as they possibly can. Rotation certainly helps that, so we won't grow second wheats at the moment. We're just concentrating on first wheats. Oilseed rape, growing it with companion cropping, so we've been doing that. Can't see that here, it's just a little bit further down the farm, but we've been companion cropping oilseed rape for I think 5 years now. And I'm sure that has an effect on establishment, weed control, cabbage stem flea beetle pressure, and then also, just sort of plant health, really. There's legumes in there fixing nitrogen for them, buckwheat in there releasing phosphorus. So it's all interlinked. The wheel is actually rather good in terms of how it all kind of links together, and a tinkering in one aspect will have a knock-on effect on everything else. In terms of sort of fuel use and fuel efficiency, we're using a lot less diesel farming like this, and that's got benefits in terms of our carbon footprint, as well as our release of carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide into the atmosphere as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think it's complex, isn't it? And that'll be really interesting to see where in the next couple of years the science goes, and just those strategies for managing it in a complementary way. We've had another question relating to what you were saying earlier about surveying groups and wildlife groups, and the question asked from Harriet and Ben: were you approached by local groups to survey birds and wildlife, or did you actively seek their input?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'm sort of a man of all trades and a sort of master of none of them, really. So in order to get the most accurate information about what we've got here, you've got to get experts involved. So the West Midland Ringers group, that was purely something I saw on Twitter. They were surveying on a friend of mine's farm up in Staffordshire, and I just tweeted them and said, there's a farm here, we've got some really fun things going on, are you interested? Couple of emails later, down they came. So there are people out there that want to come and survey. The owners here have been a little bit cautious, shall we say, about who comes and surveys, because we never know quite what they're going to find. So just before I came here, so 20 years ago, somebody went off a footpath and they found a violet click beetle. And a violet click beetle is really quite rare. There are 5 sites in the country where they are found, and we're the 3rd one of those, behind Sherwood Forest and Windsor Great Park. So it's exciting to have something like that, but it's also something we don't want everybody to then come and start walking all over the farm, A, trying to find them and take them home with a pin through them to stick on a wall, or B, just the fact that they're not on public rights of way and they're sort of milling around all over the place. So everybody sort of gets vetted, but there are people out there wanting to survey, and I don't have time to go surveying. They were out here using thermal imagery last night till 11 o'clock at night. Well, after drilling and harvest, I'm pretty knackered, don't really want to be doing that, although the information is really valuable. So the more people you can get to come and help, the better. So we've been using those. They've only just started, but prior to that, we had a really nice guy in the next village, sadly died this year, John, and him and his wife would come and survey ever since I came in 2004. So they've done all that surveying since that point, and he came up with lots of different ideas. He's a proper sort of a botanist, entomologist, and he'll find something, and he would say, right, well, in order to improve that habitat, Jake, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And I'd be like, oh, John, seriously, we're in the middle of harvest, we've got this to do, we've got that to do. No, if you want to improve it, you got to do this. So, and that's what we would do. So those sorts of people, they are out there, and it's more interaction. Again, going back to our wheel of here, community engagement, absolutely crucial. We can't do it all ourselves. So you get a few trusted people to come in and help you.
It's a great example of, yes, community engagement is fantastic, but there's also, you have to manage it as well, don't you, in terms of the risk and then people walking on your farm and where you don't want them to be, and just being aware of that. You mentioned there about the, asking you to do something in the middle of harvest, and I suppose that leads on to also the economic investment that you're making in this too. And we've had a couple of questions about, especially with higher level stewardship and things like that. So, and also soil tests. So just to go through some of those questions, and if I start with let's go to sorry. I had a question on reward. There we go. So without the stewardship scheme, can you see the boundaries and wildlife areas paying their way and or even remaining profitable?
Without stewardship money, then no, because we are taking land out of production and we're not actually able to sell anything. So, the mercenary would say, no, there's no kind of extra value to that at all. I think where that value for us comes in is the fact that without all these extra habitats dotted around, are beneficial insects that are helping us control aphids, that are helping us control slugs, they would also disappear. And then we would be then back into more and more chemical corrections or chemical controls, if you like. So I think the stewardship money definitely helps. If we didn't have that, we probably wouldn't go to the same degree of what we do. For instance, we've got 120 skylark plots up here on the top of the hill. And would we have those still? I probably wouldn't. We've got so many habitats for skylark that I probably wouldn't worry about not sending a sprayer out in December to go and spray them off, and then spraying them off again later in the year because we get weeds and things like that in them prior to harvest. There are other things like wild bird food plots we probably would definitely still keep. We run a shoot here on the farm, and they are actually quite helpful in terms of their placement on shoot days. So there are certainly elements that would stay, and there were elements that would go. We're just waiting to hear as to whether or not we've been successful in a higher tier application, which we should hear this month, which will hopefully start off in January. But in terms of some of our more marginal areas, I mean, if I just flip the phone around a second here, this is actually a good bit of the field. If I just go just up here, hang on a minute. So literally just to here, this is the rockery. This is kind of what Cotswold brash soil is like, those of you that haven't seen it. Really, really thin soil. This is cultivated every year for these rare arable plants. And, the yield return for these areas is quite minuscule. So, although we wouldn't necessarily get a payment for them, we wouldn't get much yield off it anyway. I remember combining the first year I was here, right up on the top of the hill, going around the headland, all the deer had flattened it, and it was doing 4 tons a hectare, and it had the same input as the rest of the field that was doing 10 tons. So actually, it makes economic sense to not farm those bits. And if we can then provide a habitat, and if we can get the sheep to control it or the sheep to walk over it and eat some of them as an extra benefit, then we'll try and do that. So I think it's a mixed bag. Some would definitely stay, some would definitely go. And the dog's rolled in some badger muck now, so that's going to be fun.
Oh no, oh gosh. On the topic of the stewardship scheme, how was the concept put together? So were you alone or did you receive advice? Oh, he's very guilty, not at all sorry for what's just happened.
Oh, we'll have to. Oh, somehow there's 4 people here now. What have I done? Hang on. Nice to see Jenny. Oh no, I've pressed something or other now. Must be my phone screen getting all wet. Sorry, Lucy, I got sidetracked there with the pong of the dog.
The question was, did you receive advice when you put together the concept for this future scheme, or did you do this alone?
Yeah, so the previous ELS HLS scheme, which expires now, I did almost exclusively myself, apart from some advice in terms of the FEP, the Farm Environmental Plan, which FWAG did for me. But the amount of hoops that you need to go through for a application now really precludes, I think, anybody that is actively involved in farm management, because they've just got so much going on. So we actually employed FWAG to do this scheme in conjunction with me, obviously, to do all the toing and froing with the RPA. You know, it's just soul destroying when the RPA asks you some of the questions. You know, apparently we're not allowed to do some of our grassland establishment works on our own farm because they think we might be being paid ourselves rather than paying a third-party contractor. You know, it's just ridiculous. The system is broken, so we can't do that ourselves because there's just so much else going on. So I did get FWAG to do that for me, and that was some money very well spent in terms of my sanity. B, it's the application window was all through in the run up to harvest and then the harvest itself. So yeah, that was the route we decided to go. And why we went to FWAG versus, you know, another land agents organization that could have done the form for us was that they are involved in grassroots conservation. They have got the skills to be able to walk the farm and say, yep, that's a great habitat. In order to improve it, we need to do X, Y, and Z. So you know, if we need to get experts in to come and help us, then we will definitely do that.
So we've another question about what professional advisory input do you have on a day-to-day basis on the farm? I suppose related to that point.
Sort of on a day-to-day basis, not so much really. We do employ the services out of a farm management company, and we will have quarterly meetings with them in order to check my sanity and my wacky brain ideas that they are along the right paths and along the right tracks. There's a bit of a sense check for the trustees and Penelope here. So there's quarterly meetings there. We've got quarterly meetings with trustees, but that's sort of about it. In terms of agronomy, we use an independent agronomist, and then independent sort of soil health people as well, just to have a look at some of the interpretation, I think, of some of the soil tests, as to how we can improve that. Yeah,
it's something we touched on earlier about the difference between monitoring and measuring, and then actually using that information and interpreting it. So yeah, it's a considerable amount of work if any one person was doing that themselves. We've had another question about, so do you ever undersow with grass instead of cover crops within late harvested crops?
We've undersown grass, undersown it into spring barley, and then taken the spring barley off and had a grass lay. Well, not so much grass, but sort of clover lay. We're trying to use a lot more clover than grasses, with sort of plantain, chicory, things like that in it as well, sort of, so to try and reduce the worm burden on some of the sheep. So no, I don't think we really have in that precise scenario. I'm just trying to think why you would want to necessarily do that. I'm not quite sure why grass into cover crop, because you'd probably want to get the grass in sort of as soon as you could. But everything gets cover cropped. If the field is going to be bare for 4 weeks, I used to 5 to 6 weeks, but now we're putting things. And yeah, we sort of variate the spend in accordance to the length of time that the cover crop is going to be in the ground. But yeah, 4 weeks we would put a cover crop in, and that's crucial in terms of soil health and keeping that soil alive. But it's also the fact that if you don't feed the bugs in the soil, the bugs will automatically start cannibalizing. Well, they'll start eating available organic matter, and then they'll start cannibalizing themselves. And if they start to do that, then your population is being reduced. So, you need to keep that food going into them, and the food that they eat ideally is carbohydrates and root exudates that the plants push out. So that's why we're trying to keep things growing for as much as the time as we possibly can.
Harriet and Ben, you asked that question. Did you want to just perhaps follow that up on anything specific to yourselves?
Yeah, like we're based up in Aberdeenshire, so getting harvested end of August, beginning of September is very difficult to get a cover crop in, especially when our soil temperatures are dropping below 10 before October often. So it's trying to close that gap. So we're trying to find ways of getting something established before we combine the next crop, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I hadn't quite appreciated where you were, and I think that far north it is a challenge because that operating window is very often quite small, tricky harvesting conditions. The only thing, and we're not quite the same here, but we're 1,000 foot above here, so our normal wheat comes off here 25th of August. And again, we'll start to see growth drop off at the end of October. So then that's a kind of an eight week sort of window to get something established there. So we have played around with spinning crops into standing wheat before harvest, and it's mixed. Some years it works really well. We've also spun cover crop in before we've harvested oilseed rape, where we're not using glyphosate to desiccate. Again, at this sort of altitude, it's a much cheaper operation, 10-12 pounds a hectare versus 45 quid for drilling it all in. So that's one way you could do it. The other way, which again might work, and I don't know what your sort of row spacings are, whether you could intersow something in kind of May time as a sort of an understory. I guess the risks are you have a wet and a delayed harvest, and then that all pops out of the top of your wheat crop. So it's not easy, but certainly spinning stuff in would be a good place to start.
Great. And another question on that. So what species are you using in your cover crops?
Yeah, so lots of different species. With the really poor or sort of last autumn that we had, we actually fallowed probably 200 hectares of, not quite 170 hectares of heavy land to try and put some goodness and some heart back into it. And we used a 16-way cover crop species mix there with a lot of C4 plants in it. So sunflowers, maize, millet, a lot of legumes, 4 or 5 different types of clover for nitrogen fixing, and then some oats, a bit of rye, some stubble turnips, some forage rape. So a whole host of things, all again coming back to diversity. We don't know what soil species of sort of bacteria and fungi we have, so we don't want to be specific about what we feed them. And that's the problem with monocropping, because you are selectively selecting. You are selecting for species that interact with wheat or oilseed rape. So sort of companion cropping, cover cropping, I think is a really good way of maintaining a much more balanced and healthy population of bugs in the soil. But it depends on how long those crops are going to be in for. So in a four-week fallow, sort of after peas and before wheat, for instance, we would just spin some mustard on. So 10 kilos of mustard. We did that this year. It worked really well because it was a catchy August. Other August, it hasn't worked very well because it's just been really dry. So we're looking at putting a spinner on the front of a tractor with a Cambridge roll behind, so we can spin on and then roll in, as opposed to drilling in. So that's kind of a halfway house, really. Up here, we've got a pretty poor cover crop, I'll be honest. which is mainly oats. Now then, let me see if I can do this. We've got some sort of up round our knees at the moment, but we've got oats and berseem clover in here. Oh, dog, and a smelly dog, and some mustard, bit of Phacelia in there, bit of vetch here. So in terms of go-to things, if you're just starting out on it, then there's things in the shed that you can use. So oats, beans, peas. They're easy. They're on the farm. Don't cost you very much. Beans is another good one. If you want to start buying species in, buckwheat's really good. It can get up to flowering and seed setting in 6 weeks, which may or may not be an issue. I don't tend to worry about it because as soon as the air temperature gets to 5 degrees, it'll die off anyway. So in terms of competition and a pest, if you like, in a weed in the next crop, very, very rarely. I've never had an issue with it. But it's relatively cheap and it's great for mining phosphorus out of the ground. Phacelia is also quite a nice one. It's a really small seed, so you don't need much of it in a mix. It is quite expensive, but you don't need very much of it. Vetch is also another great one. Obviously legume, nitrogen fixing. We've got vetches that will be fixing nitrogen in 5 weeks up here. So actually your return on that investment is relatively quick. Rye is also good if you want something really aggressive, something to smother the ground. You may be smothering weeds out, then rye works really well. If you've got livestock, again, something else to add into the mix. Rye and vetch as a combination. We did some work with Kellogg's in 2014, and we were getting a sort of 25 to 30% crude protein out of that mix. So, in terms of fattening lambs, for instance, rye and vetch works really, really well. Very aggressive rooter, great for mopping up nutrients. Just got to watch the following crop and when you destroy it. So, yeah, so it's sort of horses for courses, really. How long it's going to be in the ground for, how much do you want to spend, and whether you've got any problems that you're trying to solve with that cover crop. So for us up here, we want to grow organic matter. Compaction isn't a problem. On the heavy land, where compaction could well be an issue, we will use something that's got a bigger, more aggressive taproot in it to try and alleviate that. And the sand and gravel land, that's all about organic matter as well. And also chucking some nice things in. I love walking through a cover crop that's in flower at the moment, and seeing, not today, but seeing bees and butterflies and things like that, still out and about utilizing it, and insects hovering around. So, just have a little play around. This year we've used sunflowers. Going to try and start growing sunflowers ourselves. And that's been a revelation, actually. C4 plants, because of the speed that they can grow and the ability to turn sunshine into a lot of carbon very quickly, is something that we need to explore a bit more about. So growing our own, saving the seed, and then oh, sorry about that. Somebody just rang me. Saving that sunflower seed to try and use more of them, because it's such a short growing season. You'd want to put the seed rate up a little bit, but if you were buying all that seed in, it would be expensive. So by growing our own, I think we can probably get around it.
Brilliant. So we're nearly coming up to the end of time. That's absolutely flown by. We've got just a last question asking if you could tell us a bit more about how you integrate the sheep and arable enterprises.
Yeah, very happy to talk about the sheep. They are really crucial to what we're trying to do across the whole farm, but the integration to the arable, I think, is really important. So we are trying to graze all of our cover crops, really. So it's great winter food for the sheep. It does involve quite a lot of fencing. They don't really need watering at this time of year, but there is quite a lot of fencing to do. So they will integrate. So at the moment they're on grass. We're just about to start tupping the ewes in a couple of weeks' time. Nearly all of our lambs have gone this year. Again, we're getting better at rotationally grazing and pushing lambs out the door. That's worked really well. This summer, with all these fallow crops around, we actually grazed 450 ewes on 50 hectares of summer cover crop, and they were on there for 7 weeks. And that's drilled in with wheat now. So that worked really, really well in terms of releasing some pressure from our permanent grass to try and get that to green up and grow a bit more bulk for the winter. So lambs will be finished on stubble turnips or grass. Historically, our grassland management hasn't really been good enough. We're getting on top of that now. So we're actually fattening more lambs off grass. But traditionally, they would all have... Quinn, come here. Go and get up. Get up. Get up. Good girl. Sorry. So yeah, lambs traditionally have been finished on stubble turnips through the winter period, whereas this year a lot of them have gone from grass. So that's one way. The other way is use on stubble turnips, and sorry, not on stubble turnips, on cover crops. Quinn, quiet. Use on cover crops. Basically, when they finish tupping on the stud, they'll then go on to cover crops right the way through till February, early March, and then they will then go back onto the parklands, ready for their outdoor lambing in their outdoor lambing groups, and then we can get on and plant spring barley or spring peas or veg after those ewes have cleared the fields.
Brilliant.
The other bit, sorry, which we're just getting into, is herbal lays within the arable system. So at the moment we've got probably 40 hectares in, and that's partly been driven by areas of the shoot where we have quite high populations of pheasants that we can't grow oilseed rape. So rather than just have a fallow period, we're taking out the winter barley and the oilseed rape crops, undersowing that lay in the spring barley before. So that's out for sort of two years, maybe a third year, and then going back into peas from the grass. So herbal lays, I think, are something that will, if we get into the higher tier scheme, we've got another 50 hectares of that coming on board. And I think that will give the sheep a really, really big uplift in terms of productivity, because we've got 300 hectares of permanent grass, which isn't very, very productive. It's all been managed under low input or very low input stewardship options. But if we can get some clover dominated herbal lays in for a couple of years, that's going to have a huge increase in productivity, I think, for the sheep. And then obviously that's a 2-year break, and then we can go into a much cleaner and more structured arable field for our arable crops as well. So this next spring is the first a lot of herbal lays coming out. They're going to go into peas first and then wheat. So it'll be fascinating to see how those fields have responded from, that would be 3 years actually in grass.